And the first muscle we have is the epicranius. You'll remember the epicranius is a muscle group, so it's part of a larger group. The two parts of the epicranius are the frontalis, which are located up on the forehead, and the occipitalis, which is located on the back of the head. So those are the two components of the epicranius muscle. We next have the orbicularis oculi, which is the muscle that rings around the eye, hence oculi. And we have the orbicularis oris, which is the muscle that rings around the mouth. Coming straight back off the corner of the mouth right here is the risorius. So it comes straight back off the corner of the mouth. Also coming off the corner of the mouth, but going up, are the zygomaticus muscles. And that kind of makes sense because they're going up to the zygomatic bone. We have the zygomaticus minor on top and the zygomaticus major on the bottom. Those are our two zygomaticus muscles. The masseter is the heavy chewing muscle located, sort of runs along the ramus of your mandible. So your masseter is this large muscle located at the back of the mandible. On the side of the head, we have the temporalis, named for where it's sitting. If you look at some of the bones, frontalis on the frontal bone, occipitalis on the occipital bone, temporalis on the temporal bone. So you can see there's some overlap here. Some of these names aren't so bad to go through. The buccinator is the muscle located underneath, or more accurately, we'd say deep to the risorius. So the buccinator is underneath the risorius. You can see it both above and below the risorius muscle. The next two muscles on our list are the pterygoids. I'm going to steal this skull for a long sec. Because this skull shows the pterygoids. Remember last week I showed them to you on the jaw? And the jaw is not ideal. This shows them a lot better. From where you're sitting, it might be sort of hard to see the details. But if you look inside the jaw down here, you'll see the medial pterygoid, and we indicated it as coming off the inside of the angle of the mandible. And it's labeled right on here, so when you get close, you'll actually see the word written on. The medial pterygoid is there, and higher up, you can see the lateral pterygoid coming off the condyle of the mandible. So when you're looking for the pterygoids, this is the skull we tend to test them on. So you've got your pterygoid muscles on that skull. Where are we at here now? The digastric muscle. This is another one that I said last week. I showed you where it is, but I didn't have an example. This is the poster that has the digastric. You'll see right there a number 13 on the poster, and it's a muscle that kind of comes and does a little L shape. So that's where you're going to find your digastric muscle.
That's
She always asks, what's this?
That's what the exam's going to be.
Yeah, she almost always asks it on the poster. So I think last week I even had you write in poster, I think.
Yeah.
So you know it's going to show up. Probably if she asks it, it'll be on the poster. The platysma was that scarf of muscle that runs along the underside of the neck, and this half torso head is the only good example I have, where you can see the nice sheathing of the muscle going underneath the half head of the torso. All right, what am I doing now? Okay, sternocleidomastoid, everyone's favorite. That's this big muscle that comes off the mastoid process of the skull and goes down, hook onto the clavicle and the sternum. So there's our sternocleidomastoid. The sternohyoid, what did I do wrong?
Nothing.
Okay. The sternohyoid is the one going off the hyoid bone and going down to the sternum. So coming straight down off the hyoid, we can see the sternohyoid. The scalene muscles are located underneath the sternocleidomastoid. So we've removed the sternocleidomastoid, and now you can see the anterior, middle, and posterior scalene muscles located up here on the side of the neck. But under the sternocleidomastoid is sort of part of the key. We finally have some muscles we can see on the back here. We have the semispinalis capitis, which we can see right here. We have the splenius capitis. Semispinalis capitis is here. Splenius capitis is right in here. And the levator scapulae is over here. If you look on your list from last week, you'll see I put numbers for those things. Yeah. Those numbers refer to the little rubber back model. I don't show the rubber back model up here too much because it's so small that you can't see what I'm poking at, but that's what those numbers refer to. So if you're studying, those numbers are for that little guy over there. That's the numbers I gave you there. All right, where are we at here? Good. Okay, so we get now into the muscles of the trunk and the shoulder. We first of all have the external and internal intercostals. You remember the internal intercostals were more towards the front, and the external intercostals were more towards the back. This particular torso here is actually quite nice for showing it, because you can actually see a drop. So you have external intercostals, and you go in. You actually drop in to go to the internal intercostals. So this guy shows them nicely as well. All right, we got the pectoralis muscles. The pectoralis major is the large, big muscle of the chest. That's a pretty easy one. If we remove the pectoralis major, you can now see the pectoralis minor. You can see much smaller underneath the pectoralis major. And you can see the serratus anterior, which is this sort of sawtooth muscle located kind of in the armpit region that we can see. All right, the rectus abdominis was what I called the six-pack. That's the vertical running muscles going right up and down the middle of the stomach. On the sides of the rectus abdominis, we have the external oblique, and I describe the external oblique fibers as being down and in, because they run from high and out to down and in. If you remove the external obliques, you can see the internal obliques, and they have fibers that run down and out, so they run sort of away from the midline. If you took away all the obliques, you'd see the transverse abdominis. It has fibers that run side to side. A lot of times, if we take the breastplate off of this guy, I don't want to because he's got some tape holding it on, but if you take the breastplate off, on the underside of the stomach, they'll see the transverse abdominis. They'll show some fibers running kind of side to side in there. All right, so through our obliques. We have the trapezius. We described the trapezius last week as being the massage muscle up on the necks. But remember, the trapezius is a fairly large muscle that actually spans a good chunk of your upper back. In your lower back, the major muscle you encounter is the latissimus dorsi that runs from your lower back and hooks up onto your upper arm bone. So far, so good? All right. Next on your list is the quadratus lumborum. I gave you a number for quadratus lumborum because you'll find it on little rubber back guy. But a lot of the torso guys, if you open them up, you can actually see the quadratus lumborum through torso guy. So by opening him up, taking all his intestines out, you can see the quadratus lumborum sitting back here. Does that make sense for everyone? So you can see them sort of through the torso guy. The deltoid is easy. Deltoid's our shoulder muscle. So the big muscle of the shoulder is going to be our deltoid. We then have the spinatus muscles. The supraspinatus is the muscle sitting in the supraspinous fossa. So here's the scapular spine. Here's the supraspinatus. Sitting just below the spine is the infraspinatus, sitting in the infraspinous fossa. We go a little further down, and now we get into the teres muscles. We have the teres minor right here, and the teres major down here. Again, on your list, you'll see numbers for supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, teres major. They're all referring to little rubber back guy. But you can see them on this model as well. Okay. The subscapularis is the one that you can't see on our torso guys. But if I get an arm, loosely together, and we look on the underside of the scapula, so in the subscapular fossa, that's the subscapularis muscle sitting in the subscapular fossa. We have the rhomboid muscles next, I think. Yeah. Rhomboid minor and major. The rhomboid muscles connect the medial border of the scapula over to the spine. And here we see the rhomboid minor sitting on top and the rhomboid major sitting just below. So rhomboid minor on top, rhomboid major just below. The erector spinae are the muscles that run down along the length of the spine. They do depict them. I don't really like the way they depict them, but you can see them on torso man here. So you can see the iliocostalis as the furthest out of the erector spinae, the longissimus as the middle group of the erector spinae, and the spinalis as the member of the erector spinae closest to the spine. So you can see them 1, 2, 3. You'll have 14 A, B, and C for a little rubber back guy. You can see the erector spinae on here a little bit. If you look over here, you can see the serratus posterior inferior, a muscle located sort of in the lower back at the bottom of the rib cage. And finally, the interspinales are those little muscles that you find between the spinous processes. You see those on little rubber back guy. I think they're number 18 on little rubber back guy, are the interspinales. So far, so good? All right. And the next thing we get to is the muscles of the thigh and leg. So let me get myself a thigh and or leg. All right. So here is our thigh or leg muscle. We'll start off with the thigh. And the first muscle group we have is the iliopsoas. Again, iliopsoas is a muscle group, so it's made of multiple muscles. One of the muscles is the iliacus, which is this broad muscle we see coming off the inside of the iliac crest. The other muscle is the psoas major that we see coming off the lumbar vertebrae up here. So psoas major and iliacus together make the iliopsoas. We have the pectineus, this little small muscle up in the upper groin here, and we said it's kind of distinct because it runs sideways. And now we get into a count. So I'm going to do the list, the muscles, the order that I do them in. It's not the order in your book anymore, but I think it helps a little bit. So you start off on the upper outer edge of the thigh with the tensor fasciae lata. You then have the beginning of the quadriceps muscles, where we can see the vastus lateralis. You can see the rectus femoris and the vastus medialis. Those are three of the four muscles of the quadriceps. The sartorius runs across the thigh, coming from up here on the iliac crest to the inside of the knee. We have the adductor longus, this muscle here. You can see that little bit of it. The gracilis is this long muscle on the inner leg. And finally, you can see the adductor magnus through here. We get to the hamstrings now. We have first the semimembranosus, and then the semitendinosus. Remember, the membranosus is broad, the tendinosus is skinny. So they're not really left and right in your count, but you can counter the membranosus before the tendinosus. And finally, we have the biceps femoris, is this last muscle here. And again, the pattern, I find it useful to learn them in that particular pattern. Underneath the rectus femoris is the fourth member of the quadricep group. I don't want to take it out because this whole thing will start falling apart on me here, but it's under here. It's a horseshoe-shaped muscle that we'll find underneath, and that's the vastus intermedius. So you guys are welcome to take it out. I don't want to try and take it out because it just turns into chaos on me. All right, we go to the butt now. Gluteus maximus, easy, right? Everyone knew this. Sort of under and beside it is the gluteus medius. If I remove the gluteus maximus, we can now see these underneath muscles, and we learn them in a pattern again, where we had the piriformis on top, then the superior gemellus, the obturator internus, the inferior gemellus, and the quadratus femoris. So those are our five muscles, learned in that order, nice and easy. All right, so that takes us through the thigh, and now we get into the muscles of the leg. The first muscles we have of the leg are the triceps surae, or what we commonly call the calf. What I've described as the upside down heart right here is your gastrocnemius muscle, and underneath it is the soleus muscle. And collectively they make the triceps surae. I'm trying to describe gastrocnemius and soleus today because I guess I wasn't doing a very good job of it. The gastrocnemius is high and outside. It's responsible for that last little bit of pop. So if you jump, that last little bit of spring off your toes that contributes to a jump is gastrocnemius. It only works when you're already up fairly high. Soleus is the deep underneath muscle, and it's responsible for digging your foot out of a bent up position. So imagine you're walking up a hill. Your soleus is the muscle. You ever gone for a hike in the woods and you haven't gone for a long walk in a while, and the next day your calves are sore? That's the soleus muscle. That's that deep underneath muscle, and that's why it'll ache the whole way down the back of your leg, because the soleus runs a fairly long way underneath. You can also see a little corner of the popliteus muscle. Take this off, not reckon anything. We can see more of the popliteus muscle located over here. So you can see it both on or off, the little popliteus muscle. We now get into a count again to go through the muscles of the legs. We find the tibia. That's kind of our benchmark feature here, so we know where we're at. The first muscle we get to is the tibialis anterior. Then we have two muscles that are sort of one on top of one another. The extensor digitorum longus is sitting on top of the extensor hallucis longus. You can see a little bit of extensor hallucis longus. If I take it off, you can see most of it, but there's sort of one on top of the other. If you look at the short legs that we have at the table over there, you can actually see more of the extensor hallucis longus. It actually shows a little more of it the way they've depicted it. We keep going, and now we're on the outside edge of the leg. And on the outside edge of the leg, we have the fibularis longus, which we see up high, and the fibularis brevis, which we see down low. We keep rotating. Now we're on the back of the leg, which remember we've removed the triceps surae. And now we can see the flexor hallucis longus, even though it's on the big toe side, the flexor hallucis longus, or it's on the baby toe side, It's the big toe flexor. We can see a little window of tibialis posterior, and we can see the flexor digitorum longus. So those are the muscles that we encounter. And then we're back to tibia on the front. There's 4 muscles of the foot that you're responsible for. This stays together. We have the abductor hallucis, located on the inside of the big toe because it abducts the big toe. We have the flexor digitorum brevis, located on the bottom of the foot because it flexes the 3 middle toes. We have the flexor digiti minimi, which is located underneath the baby toe to flex the baby toe. And finally, we have the abductor digiti minimi, located on the outside of the foot to help abduct the baby toe. All right, and that takes us through a foot. Next up is an arm. So I'll grab myself an arm and we'll go through it. Counts are going in a pattern, just like you've got in your book there. So if we start off with the upper arm, we have the biceps femoris, the major muscle of the arm. We go into the armpit area of the arm and we can see the coracobrachialis, this muscle in here running up to the coracoid process, hence coracobrachialis. On the back of the arm, we have the triceps. The triceps is a horseshoe muscle, so it runs in this sort of horseshoe shape. A lot of times people will say, okay, biceps, coracobrachialis, triceps, this must be the next muscle. Remember, it's a horseshoe. This is all triceps. And finally, if you go all the way around, you get to the brachialis muscle. So those are our 4 muscles of the upper arm that we see. We go to the lower arm, and what do we see on the lower arm? Our benchmark muscle, the one I use that sort of runs towards the thumb, is the brachioradialis. And then if we count our way across, we have the pronator teres, the small muscle right here, the flexor carpi radialis longus on the radial side of the forearm. All the flexors are on the front of the arm because that's flexing. It's moving your hands like this, so flexors are on the front. So there's your flexor carpi radialis longus. You have your palmaris longus. Your palmaris longus is sitting on top of a broad muscle called the flexor digitorum superficialis. If I go to the side of that, we find the flexor carpi ulnaris. We keep going. Now we have the extensor carpi ulnaris, because the extensors, to extend my hand, are located on the back of the hand. So there's our extensor carpi ulnaris. We have the extensor digiti minimi, this muscle here that goes to and extends the baby finger. Then the extensor digitorum, which extends the middle 3 fingers. Finally, we have the extensor carpi radialis brevis and the extensor carpi radialis longus. And that brings us back to the brachioradialis. If we look on the back of the arm here, we can see the anconeus. It's this muscle up here by the elbow. I don't really make it part of the count. And if I remove the brachioradialis, underneath it we encounter the supinator. So the supinator is located up in there. A couple more muscles on the arm before we go. And these are these 3 muscles located sort of in where the volleyball bump kind of region of your arm, to think of a spot for it. We have the abductor pollicus longus, responsible for abducting the thumb. We have the extensor pollicus brevis, extends the thumb. And then you can see the tendon for the extensor pollicus longus. You can't actually see the muscle because the muscle's buried up under some other muscles. So abductor pollicus longus, extensor pollicus brevis, extensor pollicus longus. We get to the muscles of the hand, and we did a pattern again here. The back of the baby finger is the opponens digiti minimi. The side of the baby finger is the abductor digiti minimi. The front of the baby finger is the flexor digiti minimi. The webbing of the thumb is the adductor pollicus. Across the front of the thumb is the flexor pollicus brevis. On the side of the thumb is the abductor pollicus brevis. And on the back of the thumb is the opponens pollicus. Those are the 7 muscles across the hand. And that leaves us with associated structures, and now I run all over the room. The Gallia aponeurotica is that structure that runs across the top of the head, connecting the epicranius bodies. So that's your Gallia aponeurotica. Your rectus sheath is the white across the rectus abdominis, the white sheet across the stomach muscles on the front. The linea alba is the line up the middle of the 6-pack that we see here. The inguinal ligament is this ligament that we see here, running from the anterior superior iliac spine down to the pubis bone. That's your inguinal ligament. And this little spot where you can see blood vessels and nerves popping their way through, that's the inguinal canal. So We've got the inguinal ligament and the inguinal canal. We go to the front of the knee here, from the muscles of the thigh down to the knee bone. That's your quadriceps tendon, muscle to bone. From your knee bone down to your tibia, that's your popliteal ligament, bone to bone. Remember, muscle to bone, bone to bone. We go to the back of the leg, we have the popliteal fossa, this little indent we see on the back of the leg. And finally, near the bottom of the triceps suri, we have the calcaneus tendon or the Achilles tendon, whichever way you want to go with it. Oh, I missed the iliotibial band or tract, which is the white sweep on the outside edge of the thighs. That's this big white sheet that we see coming down the side. All that's left is our flexor retinaculums now. The flexor retinaculum is located on the front of the wrist. The extensor retinaculum is located on the back. Flexors on the front, extensors on the back. Sort of, if you keep track of that, save yourself a lot of grief on tests. And if we go down to the foot, you'll see there's an extensor retinaculum running over the top of the foot. If you look in your book, you'll see superior and inferior, and that's because the extensor retinaculum actually forms a Y over by the big toe side. I've never seen her ask superior and inferior, but just so you know what they are, that's what they are. And finally, the fibular retinaculum runs off the lateral malleolus back to the heel bone. So there's our little fibular retinaculum. And that walks us through everything on the list. So it's not a huge list.